welcome to the Midweek podcast. This week we're going to be delving into the Garden of Gethsemane. We're almost nearing the end of our series on Mark.
We are.
And this is a passage that's got a lot of emotion and oomph in it. But before we delve into that, I kind of had one maybe more lighthearted question. What was your favorite board game growing up? Because you mentioned Monopoly.
I mentioned Monopoly, and I like to play Monopoly. I really did. As a kid, it was a fun game, but at times it was challenging because it's a long game. You know, not everyone's got the patience for sort of 2 to 3 hours of Monopoly. But enjoyed chess, actually.
Oh.
Yeah, I did. And part of that was I think my grade 5 teacher at school was part of a provincial chess club. And so she introduced many of us to chess at school. And what was actually quite neat, if I think back on it now, at the time we didn't think much of it, but during recess and during break, the class would be half full with kids playing chess, with chess boards all over the class, you know. And so chess was a game that I really, really enjoyed. I haven't sort of kept it up since then, but if I can share something with you quickly. Scrabble is probably the game that Sharon and I enjoy the most.
Okay.
And so we're pretty competitive and we play against each other, and we've actually got a Scrabble board. We've kept a record of every single game we've played since we've got married. For a long time it was pretty neck and neck. And then the last year or two, Sharon's been playing online Scrabble, so she's got a whole lot better than me. But yeah, so we've got this record of about like 30 or 40 or 50 games in there that we've played. So it's pretty neat.
You got to step up your game.
I've got to step up my game. I know I got to do this online thing. Practice my skill.
Man, I'm not a fan of Scrabble. Primarily because you have to know how to spell words. I know words. I don't know how to spell them. And Jenny does that thing too where she just uses all those made up words, Scrabble words.
That is so totally Sharon. It drives me nuts. Never heard the word before, but it fits.
Yeah, that should be illegal.
It should be.
For me, growing up, my favorite board game was Risk.
Okay, so you liked Risk. I'm not surprised. I thought it might be.
It was a fun game. And it was also quite a bitter game. Because, you know, you're playing with your friends and you betray each other. And you betray
them, yeah.
You know, it was one of the things that, you know, when we talk about the Garden of Gethsemane, we talk about betrayal, right? And it's like, even in a board game, even in a fun, lighthearted setting, betrayal still hurts. It's kind of a testament to how fundamentally destructive that is. And that's what we see in this garden scene as well. Like I said before, it's a rich and complex passage, and we get a view of Jesus that we haven't quite seen before. Jesus is experiencing grief and sorrow. Why is this so important? Why was this added into our Bibles?
You know, I think it's there to present us with this really compelling picture that Jesus is truly fully human. You know, and I think sometimes we can have such an elevated view of the Lord that we think that he sort of just breezed through everything because he had this supernatural power while he was here on earth. And he certainly had access to it, we see from time to time. But fundamentally, Jesus was and is fully human. So he has experienced the full range of experiences and emotions that we go through. And so we get to see that. So we get to see this beautifully fully orbed picture of who Jesus is through the Gospels, not just Mark. And here is one where we see him with a really, which he knows, terrible ordeal that lies ahead of him. You know, literally just, fear might not be the right word, but I think the full weight of what it means is hitting him. And it's crushing his spirit. You know, he knows that this is going to be a very, very hard road. And he's feeling the weight of it. And so he's feeling that grief, he's feeling that sorrow, he's feeling that deep apprehension in terms of what he knows lies ahead for him. And I think that's a beautiful picture for all of us when we face times of great trial or challenge. We know that, you know, we go through those feelings of just being totally overwhelmed. And here we see that Jesus was totally overwhelmed. I mean, he uses those words, my soul, you know, is basically consumed with grief and sorrow to the point of death. I feel that life has been squeezed out of me. So it's this beautifully, fully orbed picture of Jesus as a human being.
Yeah. I agree, and I think one of the things that we sometimes forget is that grief is derived from deep love.
Yeah.
Recently, we had a pet die, and the boys' grief was immense. They loved this little creature.
That was the gecko?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, that's, I think, a painful reality that when you have deep love, and nobody has love as deep as Jesus. And here he's seeing the culmination of what has been coming for a while and a disaster that's about to arrive. Yeah. And I think the grief and sorrow is a reflection of who Jesus is and how much he loves Israel, how much he loves the disciples, how much he loves us. And it's just crushing.
Yeah, totally overwhelming. Yeah, I mean, it's a gut-wrenchingly powerful picture.
Yeah.
And I once remember a story of a lady who didn't grow up in a Christian household and was interested in Christian faith. And I got her reading the gospel stories. And she told me afterwards, when she read the picture of Jesus, of the trial and the crucifixion, she started crying. She felt the weight of that. And I thought that was actually pretty powerful. It really is a gut-wrenching story. And she says, I felt that betrayal by his friends, in that scene.
Yeah. Another connection you made on Sunday was with the original garden, Garden of Eden. And in that story, there's a temptation or a testing. It always feels kind of strange to ask the question, was Jesus being tempted? Because we think of him as being that unflappable, strong. Yeah. Sometimes we think of Jesus as stoic, which is not correct.
Which is not correct.
But we think that.
I'd answer that in two ways. I think the first one is, I think somehow in English, maybe our understanding of the word that's used is maybe a little bit limited, and we tend to think that it's merely temptation to sin, temptation to do the wrong thing. So it does carry that connotation as well, but it also carries another connotation which I shared on Sunday, and in this particular text, many believe that's the better connotation. It's more a testing, so testing to prove the validity or the integrity of something, and particularly the integrity of faith. So Jesus was certainly being tested. Jesus was certainly being tested. I mean, we know that this is something that God does. I mean, the scripture speaks over and over the fact that God sometimes tests us to test the quality of our faith, but it's never meant as a test to break us. It's a test that sometimes exposes where the weaknesses and the flaws are, but the intent is always to grow, to develop, to mature us, so to refine us. So certainly Jesus is being tested. I mean, we see that even in the language that he uses. He's asking the Father, if there is another way, please find it. If you've got this other way that you haven't let me know so far, here's the time to reveal your hand. And I really go back to, the story of Abraham, where God has a great test of Abraham. Will he sacrifice his son? And at the last moment, God stays Abram's hand and provides a way out. And maybe Jesus is thinking, maybe there is a way out here. But he's certainly being tested. Is he being tempted? I mean, in the story itself, it doesn't speak of Satan being present in the same way as maybe the temptation in the wilderness. But we certainly know that Satan is active.
Yeah.
He's about to be betrayed. And he's about to be arrested.
Yeah.
So Satan is active. So it is certainly a time of intense testing. And possibly, Satan's also just there in the background saying, just give it up and choose another way.
Yeah. Yeah, I think too, sometimes we mess up our Garden of Eden story a bit. We go, God made a rule. Yeah. They broke the rule. Yeah. They're out.
Yeah.
But really, the context that the Garden of Eden is setting up is the same one, I think, in the Garden of Gethsemane, where it's about, do you follow through with God's will, even though you don't have the clear picture? And here, there's obviously, Jesus has a conviction that there is a possibility that this could go differently. And it's after this point that the story gets set on rails, that there's really no more option of choices,
no more option
or
of
decisions.
Choices. Yep.
It's just the story goes one direction.
This is the path now.
Yeah, very quickly.
Yeah.
And so I think too that so when Eve and Adam take the fruit and they choose to follow their own will,
Yeah.
that I think is the comparison going on.
Yeah.
And I think that really deepens our own idea of morality, because if you're thinking just about, be a good person, don't steal,
Yeah. Yeah.
like that stuff's
Live within this box and
and basically we all do that. I mean, for the most part, we all know what the right things to do in a given situation.
Yeah.
But when it's unclear and when you have to trust and you rely on God's will and purpose, that's the test. And that's the test Jesus passes here with flying colors, even though he asks for a different path.
If there is a different path, can I take it?
Yeah.
So we were talking about, the fully orbed nature of Jesus' humanity being on display here. And I just love the gut-wrenching intimacy of his prayer. He acknowledges, Father, you can do all things, so this isn't a matter of me doubting you, right at the outset. But if there's another way, please find it.
Yeah.
And it's reminded us just how hard that path was that Jesus was about to tread.
Yeah.
But then to your point, just that acceptance that if this is the will of God the Father, even though it would be tough and hard, it is good, and it is good for me to follow it, trusting that however it plays out, it will bring glory to God in the end and be good for us. So, but that is tough when the prospect ahead of you is really, really hard. In this case, is impending torture and death.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I think this idea of temptation and testing, it wasn't just about Jesus. It's also about the disciples. We know the story. We know it happens. But sometimes it's a good exercise to do a thought experiment. What would it look like if the disciples had passed the test? Now we know that chopping off ears and fighting was not going to pass the test.
No, that was a fail.
That's a fail. Running away naked appears to be a bit of a fail.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. Okay.
That's my guess.
That's fine. Okay. So fight and flight are fails.
Yeah, it appears to be fails.
Okay. So what did it look like? I thought it was a really great question, by the way, and it got me thinking. In one sense, Jesus had told him all along that a tough road lay ahead for him. And he'd spoken about the fact that as Messiah, he was very likely going to be betrayed and killed. They didn't like that particular message. And when he told them, I think at one time, they said, no, we will stand by you and we will fight for you. And he tells them that, are you prepared to go the path that I'm about to go, to drink of the cup that I'm going to drink of? And they say, obviously, at the time, I think Peter was one of it, like, yeah, obviously we will. So here, I think probably what was expected of them is to stand by the friend in his hour of need.
Yeah.
I just contrast them with some of the women that we see who were prepared to go and stand at the foot of the cross and be identified with him. They knew they couldn't change the outcome, but they could still be there with him. And many of them just fled, so they weren't even with their Lord, Master, and good friend in his hour of need.
Yeah.
So there is that, the betrayal of friendship. And I think the other one was just trusting that, okay, if he's being arrested and they get arrested, that God is in this and that God will work this out in some way. They don't know how, but that's that element of deep, deep trust. And so they fail in this episode. It's great to see that just a few weeks later, Peter will pass that test. He will preach with conviction. He'll be told that you shouldn't. He'll get jailed and God will make a way for him to get out. So he experiences that. And that's probably was a lesson for him. That could have been the outcome for you, probably would have been the outcome for you had you, passed the test in the garden. But I think it's also a great lesson in the Lord's grace to us. And the Lord knows that in our journey of faith, it's a progression of steps up and down, and hopefully over time upward. And it's nice to see here that Peter and the other disciples, do eventually get that courage and that faith to trust God, even if it leads them into difficult and dangerous places.
Yeah. Yeah, I think too that, the call to pray, even if it's doesn't result in the outcome that you want it, is a faithful approach to things, especially in situations that you can't change, or there's no clear way to change them. And I think looking back on church history, and you see the people that approached conflict and persecution with prayer, and how convincing that was for the persecutors, even. And I think that, if we were to rewrite this story, and the disciples took an extra mile approach, they're coming to arrest Jesus. And here you have the disciples not fighting, not running away, but praying and asking for God to forgive these people and to work in their hearts. And you see that in Jesus' model as well.
Right on the cross, exactly.
On the cross, where he's
doing that very
asking
thing.
God to forgive them.
Yeah.
And, I think that because in normal life, that fight or flight response.
Or freeze is another one.
Or freeze.
Yeah.
That's the response that we have just naturally. It takes character and time to foster that sort of response that's different.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right. And prayer is our access to, the power of God to be able to do that. But it takes an intentionality both to pray and then to act out in the better way, even though it may be against our natural human impulses. And I think here we just see the disciples acting out of natural human impulse.
Yeah.
In the face of a terrifying situation. And this was certainly one that the Lord had told them on numerous occasions was coming. And even as they go into the garden, he's telling them, pray. Prepare yourselves. The time of testing is come. Pray that you won't fall and fail. And the Bible's not,
we always have this natural or nature versus spiritual kind of paradigm. And the Bible appears to play into that sometimes, but usually, when we talk about just our natural response, it isn't to say that it's good or bad, but there's something more and better that we need to add on.
Yeah.
And I think that's often what we see in the Bible. It's asking us to just not follow that natural...
that first instinct that comes to mind. Yeah.
But to take the second step and go, what do I need to demonstrate who God is, who Jesus was, and what does it mean to act in a way that invites people to reconsider what they're doing without destroying them or running away from them or just being silent.
Yeah.
Well, that was our discussion for this week.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you for joining as well.
Yeah, and we look forward to doing this again and hope you enjoy watching this the next time.
Yeah, see you next time.
Bye.
Bye-bye.